Alleluia. May the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ enlighten the eyes of our heart, that we might see how great is the hope to which we are called. Alleluia.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. One Sabbath day, Jesus and his disciples were going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are your disciples doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And Jesus said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was the high priest, and he ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for anyone but only the priests to eat. And he even gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for people, and not people for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." The Gospel of the Lord. For the Pharisees, the only way to serve God was to observe the 10 Commandments. And we all know that the number 3 commandments says, "Remember to keep the Sabbath day holy." Now, the Pharisees in the time of Jesus constituted themselves into policemen. They walk all over town, in the country, in the farms, watching people to see who was breaking the Sabbath, so that they can arrest such persons and punish them. And so it happened in our gospel text today from Mark chapter 2, that Jesus and his disciples were traveling in the country on the Sabbath day. First and foremost, that was considered a violation of the Sabbath. You are not supposed to make a journey. You can't travel. You have to observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. And one of the clauses in the tradition of the elders, which was not in the Bible, was you can't make a journey. And to make matters worse, his disciples were plucking heads of grains and munching as they went. Again, the Pharisees, like I said, they were policing people. They go everywhere just looking for faults. They considered plucking the heads of grains and eating the grains. They considered it as harvesting the crop. That means one was working on the Sabbath. And so they went to Jesus. Of course, they knew Jesus. They have heard about Jesus. They know him. And so they didn't confront the disciples, so they went to Jesus. And they said to Jesus, your disciples are breaking the law. They're breaking commandment number 3. And the response of Jesus, it's really what in Bible study we pay more attention to. Jesus draws their attention to the bread, the showbread, bread of the presence. You know, all through the Old Testament, the way that God showed his presence is through bread. When Abraham met Melchizedek, the priest of the Most High God, they worshipped God with bread and wine as the way to worship. When the people of Israel were going for 40 years in the wilderness, and God wanted to show them, he sent bread from heaven. And ever since that manna, the Jewish people had always preserved bread, and they put the bread under the high altar. It's 7 breads. It's called the bread of the presence. It reminds them of the bread from heaven, how God fed them. In John chapter 6, Jesus is going to say, that bread that your ancestors ate in the wilderness, he will say, I am that bread. And so Jesus reminds the Pharisees that when King David and his people were in trouble, when they were desperate, when their life was in tatters, they went to look for bread. They entered the house of God and met Abiathar, the high priest. And they said, we really need sustenance. Our life is in shambles. Our life is in disarray. If you want to read about this story, you go to the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 21, starting from verse 1 to 6. David could have gone to anybody's farm. David could have killed the animals. He was a shepherd. He could have killed a goat. He could have killed, there was a way he could have quenched his hunger or his thirst. But he didn't do that. He knew that he needed spiritual food. So he left the sheep, the goats, he left every other option that he could have chosen. And he led his men to the house of God and met Abiathar the high priest. And he said, we need spiritual food. And Abiathar, even though only the priest, because when they refreshed the bread every 7 days, that bread had to be refreshed. And the priests that were working in the temple were the only ones who were allowed to eat the showbread. But Abiathar knew, the high priest knew, that they needed spiritual nourishment. They needed spiritual food. And so he gave it to David. He gave the bread to David and gave to his bodyguards who were with him. And they ate the bread. And so Jesus called the attention of the Pharisees to that bread. In other words, he was telling them that, look, I am the bread. Come to me. That is what Sabbath means. You see, that word, Sabbath, in the Hebrew language, means rest. You know, it's like professors in the universities, they take sabbatical. They say, oh, after 7 years, they take 1 day, 1 year sabbatical to just go and rest their heads because they've been working hard. And people take sabbatical. So that word simply means rest. And if you want a synonym in the Hebrew language for Sabbath, it just means shalom. If you want peace, rest simply means go to God for peace. And so Jesus tells them that, look, what David needed, he needed peace, he needed rest. And he went to the house of God to go have that rest. And so Jesus Christ says, the Sabbath was made for people. What does that mean? If you want to rest, if you want to have peace, come to the house of God. Come to Mass and have that bread. Jesus is the bread of life. We could have had other kinds of bread, we could have other kinds of food, but it does not give peace. It doesn't give shalom. Like we said in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 21, starting from verse 1, David had other options to quench his hunger. He was a shepherd. He had men with him. They could have hunted, they could have killed animals, they could have gone to any farm and eat. But our text says he and his companion entered the house of God. And so Jesus says to us, as he said to the Pharisees, Sabbath means come to the house of God and eat the bread of life. That's why Jesus came, to give us that bread that will give us peace. That's what Sabbath means. All these other interpretations that the Pharisees were giving, that you cannot make a journey, that you cannot heal people, all through this week we'll be reading about the Pharisees confronting Jesus about breaking the Sabbath. But Jesus wants them to understand that he, Jesus, it says here that he, Jesus, Son of Man, is Lord of the Sabbath. What you need is Jesus. Now, what is it talking about? The history of the Sabbath comes from the book of Genesis. After God created everything, on the seventh day, God rested. And then when Moses went up the mountain in the book of Exodus and collected the 10 commandments, number 3 commandment written by the finger of God says, remember to keep the Sabbath day holy. And Jesus is saying that Jesus is God. He is Lord. He is the Word by whom God created everything. He created the Sabbath. He's a member of the Trinity. And he says to them that what you need is the bread on that Sabbath day. And so that is why the Catechism of the Catholic Church today also encourages all of us to enter the house of God on the Sabbath day so that we can eat that bread like David ate that bread. That's what he needed to be able to get victory, to be able to rest. He's been fighting wars. He's been just on different kinds of expedition, but he knew that he needed that bread. and he went to the house of God for it.